Cool. Okay, so I think what we're hoping to do today is I'm gonna like go through some stuff and then we're gonna pause and ask you guys some questions and then keep talking. So I have a tiny screen and I can't see you all. So if you need me to repeat something or something weird is happening, please be verbal about it. Jenna, will you just go back to the agenda overview real quick? Yeah, so we're just going to talk like big picture, like why the project tracker, and then we're going to take a tour of the project tracker. I think I'm going to breeze through kind of the super early things, and Jenna can put links in the chat to the videos, linking like a more detailed walkthrough of like how to enter in projects. I don't think we're going to kind of skip over that part today. So I'm sorry if that's what you want to do, but if you really want to do that, you can schedule some time with Jenna and they will walk you through that. And then we're just going to highlight some project tracker wins, just I think because it might inspire some ideas about how RCDs could utilize the project tracker, and then we'll have more discussion. So in between each section, we'll have some questions and some discussion. So I'm going to try and keep my presentation really fast so you don't have to listen to me too much. So if you do have questions, put them in the chat or write them down and then we can talk about them together. Okay, go ahead, Jenna. Okay, what is the project tracker? It's a database to track and report on basically our projects, and both like keeping track for our own selves, our own RCDs, but also as a way to have that information available like to the general public, to our partners who are working with on projects, and to the people who are funding the projects. Because each one of those entities, any entity that is listed in your projects as you enter it into the project tracker can then have that any data associated with them kind of summarized, so they can say it was Department of Conservation who was funding a bunch of projects. They could then look up a specific fund and see what all the different RCDs did on that project. Or you could see all the projects that you did in 2019 or whatever. It's one of the reasons we did it is to help kind of CARCD's vision of having RCDs be relevant, excellent, and visible. We started in 2017. Currently, there's 24 participating RCDs, and we would love to have all of them participate, because really the power of communicating about the collective impact from RCDs is better when we are collecting all the data from all the RCDs. The only other thing I'll mention is that it is open source technology, which means basically that it's constantly evolving, so that when issues come up, they're usually fixed right away. And then as there's different iterations of these used across the US, and as more people invest in the program, it gets better all the time. So the goals of the project tracker is visibility. So really documenting our collective impact, both maybe at your own RCD or regionally or statewide. It's to increase our accountability. So there is, some public perception that local districts and government aren't always super accountable about how and where monies are spent and what were the outcomes. So this is one of the ways RCDs can address that concern. It's a very efficient way to communicate about conservation benefits. It's a pretty low effort tool to enter in a project and then to update it from there. And then we wanted it to be a centralized hub to find data and talk about project impacts. And then we wanted to be able to aggregate that data at many different scales, which if you play around in the project tracker, you can definitely see that. So down from like a specific type of project, like maybe riparian planting, up to like, what are all the, funds from Prop 68 funding. So there's different levels at which data can be aggregated. RCDs need to demonstrate the scope and scale and value of our conservation work with data. So we're becoming less secret, but I still feel like RCDs struggle with really demonstrating how important the work that it is that we do, and this is one of the ways. And so what you're seeing on this screen is the RCD Project Tracker has an accomplishments dashboard. where there's a drop-down menu where it says all participating RCDs. So this collects like all the data from all the projects in the tracker. So far, or when this was made, there was 315 projects with $47 million of investment and 184 partners. And then you could also drop down that menu to your own RCD and look at how many projects you have in your total investment and partners. And then if you click on one of those blue buttons below, it will detail the information. You'll get some more kind of fine comb data. So why is this needed? I'm just going to repeat this again, that RCDs need a way to tell their story. We need to tell how RCDs are helping to meet regional, state, and national goals. We need to be able to quantify the work that we do and demonstrate how the funding was spent. And the project tracker also demonstrates how much funding is needed for projects. We need to feature our funding partners and highlight them, lift them up, and make it easy for them to talk about the work that the RCDs are doing. And then highlight work on specific resource concerns. Like I said before, like maybe water quality improvements or invasive species removal or forest management or, salmon habitat. So there's lots of different ways in which we can talk about resource concerns and then display the diversity of our work. Who is a project director for? So RCDs, I think I already talked about that. It's really easy to demonstrate the history of projects. So you can enter in old projects as well as current projects. It automatically creates fact sheets that are kind of attractive and easy to share. And it's a useful place. So we use it, people want to know about a project, we send them a link to the project tracker, because on our website, we don't have like a web page for every single project that we have. And so it's a way that we can send people a link that gets automatically updated if we update those projects in the project tracker. And the project tracker is for agencies and funders to identify projects to fund, so they can search for projects they might want to fund. They can see what RCDs have done, and they can track the impact of their funding. It is really helpful in sharing with legislators and policymakers what RCDs have done, as well as provides a place for the public to learn about RCD projects. I know for our own RCD, without the project tracker, we'd have to round up some PDF or, part of a final report to send to people, which takes quite a bit of time to search for or respond to an email if people want to know about a specific project. And God forbid they want to know about a lot of projects. Go ahead. Okay, and then I just want to show that it's scalable how RCDs participate. So for instance, Tahoe RCD right now has one project, and Marin RCD has 64 projects. So there's different levels. You can do it just to show the projects you want to show, or you can use it as a comprehensive database for all your work. And currently there's no fees to participate in the project tracker. And I think we can skip this one. Okay, so my question to you, if you want to take it out of presentation mode so I can see everyone, or you want to do it there, okay, is to what extent have you worked at the project tracker so far? I think I actually heard that from most of you all. So maybe now is also a good time just to share maybe ways in which it hasn't been helpful or ways in which it has. And maybe we'll just spend a couple minutes if any of you have feedback on that.
And I just want to say, yeah, we have a little Jamboard style thing where if you don't want to speak up, you can still write down your thoughts on the stickies.
I love that introverted participation.
I think one thing I remember from when I was filling out projects is it seemed like much easier it was set up to be able to just enter things retroactively once a project has been complete, so that you're not having to go back in and update. If you were to enter a project when you first got the grant agreement, it would involve a lot more work over time, I think. And so I was kind of wondering how other folks were using it, because, you know, there would be various advantages to having it be active projects that are displayed on there just as this public interface. So I was sort of curious about other people's experiences with that.
Noelle, I'm so sorry. Would you repeat that? I got really distracted trying to understand that dashboard thing. It's pretty high tech for me. I was trying to pay attention, and it sounds like you're soliciting feedback. I'm happy to give it, but I was like looking at
Sorry,
the
yeah.
things
So I was
moving.
just wondering, like, you know, people's relative experiences of, you know, the advantages and disadvantages of entering projects either at the beginning and then having to update them throughout the process, and having the RCD serve as this public interface for active projects, and you know, something you can direct people to if you get inquiries from the public or from funders or whatever, versus like, you know, the ease of simply entering a project retroactively and having the project tracker just serve as sort of this record of work completed. I just kind of wanted to see what other people were feeling about that.
Okay, thanks for clarifying. I don't mind sharing out as far as my experience on that. You nailed it. It is a lot easier and streamlined to just wait till after the project's complete and then enter in all the information and the data. So as a program manager, project manager, that's easier for me. But considering, you know, the whole RCD's mission is working with private property owners, it is nice to have information uploaded as you go along. If it's a really complicated project, just so they can see the status and understand, you know, when funding is secured, if we're waiting on more funding or permitting. So I think it depends on the project itself and which landowners you're working with and what their needs are. And I'd say for us, I mean, it's been a blessing in some ways where people have found our projects on there and reached out and emailed the RCD and been like, wow, you guys are doing great work. Super happy to see this and learn about this. And then we've also had, you know, a recent Public Records Act request where they've gone onto Project Tracker and they're like, we want to know everything about this. And then, you know, grants from like 20 years ago, which has had Nancy and I and staff having a lot of fun over the last month. So, but that's been, that's my feedback so far, at least using it.
Thanks, Sarah. Nancy?
So I had a question, because I think this is such a good thing to talk about. Does it have fields where you can say, you know, in progress versus it does? Okay. Yeah, I mean, it seems like for highlighting our work, it would be really nice to know that have the active, you know, have all the active projects being shown, but then it gets complicated with the money because it hasn't really all been spent yet. So I don't quite know how you would.
Yeah, so what happens when you enter in a project, either when it's in the planning phase or in the active phase, is you then are prompted to update it every year. And so you quantify both the outcomes. So you put in your expected outcomes in the beginning, and then you put either your reported outcomes by year and also the budget. And I think the hardest part that I found, Noelle, is like the parsing out all the different match sources and fundings by year. But it's really important because it's like, you know, and it also doesn't align. Like I think we do it by calendar year, but our grants are usually, I mean, whatever, ours are mostly by fiscal year, you know, June to July. So that part is a little bit complicated, but I think as long as you have a system internally where you're doing it close enough, I think that is good. And then, you know, for those things, you wait until that year ends and then you enter in the information. And I think it's just important to track things over time. But yeah, it is a little bit of extra work. Although I want to say to Noelle, we have had some improvements to the tracker where now any like expected outcomes, so you say like, these are the things we hope to do with this project, it now auto populates each year for your reported, so you don't have to go find them and type them in again. You can just enter it in or delete them. And the same thing with the funding, so hopefully that will save a little bit of time. But yeah, it's mostly just going through your own records and then parsing it out. I find that is the most time consuming. But if you have all your reports ready and you wait until you've done all your invoicing for the year or whatever, then it can be pretty quick.
Would it be easier if we wrote in money to cover that in our grants.
Yeah, and
yeah.
we can talk. I'm gonna have a meeting with CRCD soon, but what we do is we included as just one of our like kind of project management in our project management task is ours to put the project in, and then we also include funding for the project tracker in general, because we do have some, I skipped over the slide, some annual costs for site maintenance and stuff, and so far we've had enough grants and stuff to cover that without asking RCDs to contribute. But yeah, so we also do that in our grants. We'll put like whatever $1,000 for the site maintenance, which is something that Gold Ridge handles as the administrator, but that other RCDs could contribute to. I think we'll move on because I have a couple things I want to cover. Hi, Sarah. So is that okay if we move on, Jenna, and then we'll have more time for discussion. Okay, so this is the part where I'm gonna like, for the new newbies, kind of go over what the project tracker is. For those of you who have been using it, you can multitask, and then I'll holler when I get to the improvements. So I'll try and be fast. So this is the front page of the project tracker. You can find information. Oh, this is the administrator's role. So what most the public sees is just the first 4 tabs. And so you can just go to the next screen. So you can search for projects by like, there's just a list. So this is like all the projects. So in any of those open white boxes, you can, if you know, like you want to look for a carbon farm plan, you can type that into project name, or you can scroll over and you can look at ways that the projects are categorized. So you could say like water quality or climate resilience. And then you could also look by RCD or project stage. So there's all different ways you can sort information by the list. And then next slide. This is kind of what it looks like when you're in the project tracker. So right here we have like a carbon farm plan. So there's, you know, a project overview, performance measures, financials, all those kinds of things. And in each one, it'll kind of have text. And when you're entering as an RCD, entering in the project information, there's public and private data entry. So you can put information that you don't want the public to see in here, like if it's notes to yourself. And then as to Nancy's earlier question, the things on the top are kind of tracking the project. So you could have it in the proposal phase, the planning and design phase, implementation, post-implementation, and completed. And depending on what phase you're in, you are prompted to do different things. For example, in the proposal stage, they don't ask you to update the funding every year, but there is a section for how much funding you need. And so then that will be a way that you could collect data on, say, how much, like of all the carbon farm plans in here, how much money do we need to implement that all? You could get that information. And it also has a map. I'll just go back. One last thing is, you know, we do have landowner privacy issues. So you can include parcel specific information, and you could also hide that information or not include it, and then just give a watershed location or even just like a no location. Okay, next slide. This is again just showing an example. So when you're in this tab on the accomplishments dashboards, if you click on the button about what impacts have we had collectively, go ahead, Jenna. It'll bring up things like this. So it brings up individual performance measures. So planning documents, reforestation by acres, water conservation. And so you can look up like different practices by different years. And then in the drop-down menus under, for example, water conserved, it could be, there's different ways that people can track how they conserve water. And so this is, and then under the options, you can download this data. It downloads into an Excel table. So then you can manipulate the data if you need to. And you can do this for all RCDs or just your RCD, or there's lots of different ways you can pull up this information. This is an example of what the fact sheets look like. So once you enter all the projects into the project tracker, it'll automatically develop this fact sheet, which is 1 page front and back, or 2 pages. And it goes over key accomplishments. It goes over expenditures. It will track how much funding you need. It'll have a map and it'll have pictures and a description and talk about your funders and your partners, all the things you would want to share about a project. And here's some pictures. And you can actually choose which pictures you want to do. This is an example of like, well, maybe we wouldn't want to include in our after pictures kids' drawings of the planting, but that's something that you can choose within the project tracker. So here's the part for those of you who have been multitasking, if you want to know about new things about the project tracker. So we have a way of searching for projects by needed funding. So you can talk about, agencies or other people could find projects that need to be funded. I mentioned this earlier, but it auto-populates reported performance measures based on your expected performance measures. So say, for instance, in like carbon farm plans, you have all the things that this property could do to increase carbon sequestration or reduce greenhouse gases, but you're not doing them all at one time. And so when you go and say like, okay, you did the plan in 2022 and in 2023, you got a grant to do a little bit of compost application, then it'll auto-populate and you can just choose that one, tell it how many acres, tell it how many green carbon sequestration you calculated that will equal, and then you won't have to go through the system and search for it again. You can protect landowner privacy, so you can hide project locations. Private notes, that's the other thing I mentioned. So we have places for private notes, which is new, which is nice. So maybe you would put, for instance, like if you're calling it carbon farm plan A, you can put maybe in the private notes that that's, the Smith family farm or whatever. You can include attachments now, which is new. So if you did want to include like more data or, sign-in sheets or a thank you note or your final report or whatever, you can include that now in the project so people can look up the attachments. We have updated some things in the project tracker so that it better meets the needs for fire and forestry programs. We also now have the ability to customize project fields. So if you're working on this, you're like, wow, I really wish there was a spot where I could talk about this, then you can contact one of the administrators and we can create a new data field in the projects. It will be a data field that then it will be available to all projects across the system. So it'll be something we'll want to think about, but we do have the ability if we find that we need it to kind of adjust the project tracker. And then right now we have one-on-one support. I can't see there's anything else on the bottom of the slide. Okay, so now we're getting to the discussion part again. And this is more just like food for thought for yourself. So if you're not already using the project tracker, it's important to think about who at your RCD will add projects to the tracker. I will say when we've tried to be like, okay, like let's have our intern or whatever enter in all of our projects to the project tracker. It goes much faster if you know about the project and know where to find things. Or for instance, if it's already complete, you can just give that person your final report and it's really easy to enter in. But we have found that it works better if it's the project manager who's entering it, or at least a project manager who is verifying that the information is correct. And then the project tracker has what we call project stewards. So each RCD has their own person who approves their project. So a staff will enter in a project and then they'll submit it, and the submit will go to their project steward. So like Valerie, for instance, said that she was Sonoma RCD's project steward. So all projects go to her, and so she would review them and either say, oh, you know what, this doesn't seem right, like fix this, or maybe it's perfect and she just approves it. So there's an ability to go back and forth with whoever entered the project and ask for clarification or to fix things. Yeah, and so in most RCDs, the project steward is executive directors or program managers, and you can actually have more than one. So we do have more than one project steward at our RCD. Okay, next slide. Okay, so I guess our next question is maybe for those of you who have used it or who are just starting, what do you think you may need in order to use the project tracker more? So maybe if we could turn off the PowerPoint so I can see everybody. Yeah,
And
so
Sarah dropped a question in the chat. I don't know if you got to see that.
I didn't see
Yeah,
any of the chat.
The projects that you mentioned, like being able to filter and see like need funding, which is awesome. One thing I always think about with working with the regulators is, you know, we have project applicants that come in and they're doing XYZ and they have to do mitigation, but they can't do on-site mitigation. And then it gets complicated with mitigation banking and then it's funding, like what projects are, and so they always look to me and they're like, what projects need money? And I'm like, ooh, this looks tempting. I know you can't mix it with grant money because they just have to stay separated, but I'm wondering, would that be an avenue? I mean, that'd be a cool thing to send these folks to through the regulators. Okay.
Yeah, we were just talking about that. And one example, like at our RCD, is that we have a landowner who is like, man, I have all this riparian area and I would love to do restoration, but like it's not in an area where we have funding. But we know that Caltrans is looking, for example, to get fund pre-mitigation. So they do mitigating before they have to mitigate in the future in areas where they know they may need to do work. So that could be an example where if that project was in the project tracker, you could say like, okay, there's a potential for, you know, 1/2 acre of wetland or riparian habitat enhancement. And that could be, you could point them to that to get their juices flowing. But yeah, there'd be a lot of nuances, I imagine, to, you know, like how the funding could be utilized and how much you would need and all that kind of stuff, depending on what the mitigation requirements were.
Oh, super cool. This is great. This will motivate me to get in Project Tracker a little bit more.
Okay, anyone else have feedback? What would help you use it more? If you were paid to, if someone did it with you. Okay.
You should have assigned us homework before in advance of this, of like, here's a project, go to Project Tracker.
Okay, I'll assign you homework afterwards.
Yeah, give me homework
Lisa said funding would help.
Yeah. And I think just to reiterate, you know, the way we do is when we have grants, we just make sure we include some time to enter projects in the project. And I don't know, those of you who've done it more, like when I enter projects, you know, depending on how complicated, it's as short as like 30 minutes to as much as maybe an hour. And then updating it maybe the same. I don't know if people have other experiences. I've been using it a lot more than most people, but it's not like, you know, 3 hours a month or anything. It's kind of a one-time sit down, do it.
Smart that you write it into the grants though. That's awesome. It's good thinking.
Yeah, and you don't have to like write it separately. It's just like in the project, you know, you just make sure to include it in the project management or administration part of the grant.
Yep, exactly.
Or reporting. Okay, anyone else want to say anything about what would make it easier for you?
I think one thing, as I'm sure Jenna's recognized, you know, if you look at our whole like project grant portfolio we have going on at the RCD, it's like a big Venn diagram where you have multiple projects funded through one grant, and then one project will end up getting multiple grant sources funding it. And so it's hard to know if you should be entering things as grants or as like, what would make more sense for the public would be as a project. You know, you have a certain site and you're implementing a certain thing at a certain site, but it doesn't really fully cover all of our work then. And so I think trying to like entering things individually and then having other people enter things individually, it's almost like we need the map first. We need the plan of how projects are going to be entered if they're as grants with featuring multiple project sites or as individual projects. And we need to like have that all thought out ahead of time. Otherwise I get sort of stumped with trying to figure out how to enter things, I think. And so maybe that could just be something we talk about once a month at a staff meeting or something, is that looking at the incoming at projects as they develop and also incoming grants of like, okay, what's this going to look like as far as project tracker entries?
Yeah, it's a good point too, especially for like multi-district or multi-partner projects. So like when we do things with, say, Sonoma RCD, it's like, well, who's going to enter what part is it in? So that definitely is something that takes consideration. Good point. Okay, well, I'm going to move on just because I guess I've been jabbering on more than I intended. And maybe I can skip over the wins a little bit so that we can keep chatting, but I wanted to give some examples, and I'm going to not make Sarah give this, but it's for her RCD. But one of the examples is that, you know, Marin RCD was one of the first RCDs, as many of you know, to work on carbon farming through the Marin Carbon Project. And in 2017, they were one of the first like proponents and investors in the Project Tracker. And they started entering in a lot of their projects into the Project Tracker. They, I think, still have the most projects in the Project Tracker. And, you know, in support of Marin RCD's like really successful carbon farming program, the County of Marin applied for a DOC SALC grant to update the ag chapter of their county's climate action plan with funding for the RCD and partners to conduct like analysis to reach the chapter. And in 2021, the Coastal Conservancy awarded the RCD $1 million to implement their carbon farm plans, as well as currently the Marin County has a sales tax measure on their, that's going to go, I think, the news is it's going to go on the ballot that would provide $600,000 a year for 10 years. And one of the reasons that I've heard is because, you know, because they put their information in the Project Tracker, they're accountable to the public for how that measure funding would be spent and is spent. And without that, you know, it would be really hard for the, you know, public to feel comfortable of how that funding was spent. Could you imagine how awesome it would be if your counties had project trackers where they showed you how they spent the money and what it was spent for? I feel like I would really love that personally. I keep trying to convince our county to invest in something like this. Okay, next slide. This is just another example. Carbon Cycle Institute was working on lobbying for RCDs to include funding for, you know, carbon farm plans in AB 125. And I think it was Patricia just went to the Project Tracker and just zoomed real quick, and she aligned it with one of our legislative districts and said, these are all the projects that are happening in your district. And this is their potential collective impact. So it's a really quick way to get that information. Next. The Gold Ridge RCD has been contacted by 2 randomly people who like found projects on the Project Tracker and said, hey, we want to fund something like this. So in this, I don't even know how they found the Project Tracker, but anyhow, they did. And then they called us and then they offered us money. So anyways, I hope that happens for you guys too. Next slide. And then really it's, again, a way to support agencies. And this kind of gets, this is my slide that gets to Sarah's notion. So you can in here, in the project map, you can look for projects by different, either by stage and also by their resource area. So for instance, if someone was looking for some mitigation projects, they could come in here and be like, okay, I will need to do some water quality improvement and I want it in the planning and design phase. You can kind of zoom in. This is the Gold Ridge RCD district, and these are the projects we have in there within the planning and design phase. And so, you know, funders could search for projects and then contact you if they felt like it aligned with their needs. Okay, so I'm curious what you guys think are the biggest benefits, and you can even put challenge in there if you want to, for that you see for your RCD utilizing the Project Tracker. For instance, one of the things I hear from people is just there's like people are nervous to use it, or they try it once and it takes a bit of time and so they don't keep entering it, or like what we've talked about with Nancy, there's no, besides like internal incentive, and if your RCD incentivizes it, there's no right now reason to do it unless you find like a benefit. But perhaps if it was a requirement of the grant to put it in there, that might be enough of an incentive to do it. So yeah, any thoughts around that? I would love to hear from you all. RCD staff are usually so chatty.
Well, I have a question. Would anybody be mad at me if I said you have to do this as part of the contract when you want my money? You know, as a requirement from CRCD. if we would pay for it. You know, we would tell you, okay, let's please put this much in your grant, and then, but you're going to be contractually required to do it.
Yeah, I think if it was part of reporting, whether interim or final reporting, that would definitely make it more incentivized, obviously.
Yeah, it doesn't seem, it seems like it could probably be a fair, if not complete, substitute for the types of reports that we have to do now.
Yeah,
in
that's
all
what I was
different
thinking
ways,
too.
which would be really cool.
I think that would be great. It also, I mentioned that my role is encouraging our staff to use the tracker. And so it would be when it's a requirement, it's a good way to get people to do it. The one thought I have is just that there could be types of work that don't naturally fit into being put into the project tracker. And so if it was going to be an across the board, say, RCD requirement, it'd just be really good to leave space for types of work that don't make sense to enter it in there, because we don't want like sort of clutter in there. I feel like, if
Right.
I can't give an example of what that would be, but I think there would be some things that might kind of clutter it up and not be a good fit.
Well, that's great. Sounds like generally people are supportive. Yeah, as also a, yeah, I think it would be great, obviously. I think it's a great idea. I also think like making it part of, I know we're not really using the tier system actively, really, but being part of the tier system, like if an RCD had a certain percentage of their projects entered in the project tracker, because I do think it speaks to this bigger, like statewide issue that like,
Right.
you know, RCDs, some are considered not transparent, or people don't know what we're doing or why we spend money on things. And I think that it would kind of help demystify and publicize that in a way that is accountable and transparent.
I think a lot of it also comes down to, like, at least for me personally, just accounting for the time and just going ahead and in my brain thinking like, okay, when I'm setting up my Excel files to track a project and like manage it along the way, that gets added to my list of like, put the into project tracker. And then also like reminding myself when I'm doing the final report and wrapping up, having that as another box to check of like, okay, my final report's done. Oh yeah, I need to go back to project tracker and like complete the project and wrap it up. So for me, it's just setting aside the time and reminding myself that it's just as important as everything else and making sure that I do it.
And one nice thing is once you enter in the project, then it will give you an annual reminder to update your project.
That's great.
Whether you choose to ignore it or not is up to you, but
Yeah, I was about to say, I got those reminders. I remember that with my fisheries projects. I was like pulling my hair out with those projects. I'm like, no more things to do. Oh my gosh.
no. I know. I feel like part of the RCD staff issue in general is like, oh my God, we all have so much to do. And it's like hard to add anything else. But I have to say, as being one of the people who's like, okay, tell me the number of carbon farm plans you have, or tell me this and tell me that, it's a lot easier to point people to the project tracker than to try and get that information from my staff or from our server.
Yeah, definitely in the long run, it saves a lot of time. It's worth it putting it up front.
Cool. Okay. I forget what else we were talking about, Jenna. Would you go to our PowerPoint? I feel like there was a couple other things we wanted to chat about. And again, I haven't been watching the chat, but for those of you who are like brand new, schedule some time with Jenna. And there's also, we have two kind of good videos, one just like how to enter projects in general, and then one specifically for carbon farm plans. There's like some nuances to carbon farm plans that we want to make sure people think about. So if you haven't watched it yet, it's on there. And then for those of you who don't like watching videos, we also wrote it down.
Where are the videos?
So in the project tracker, there's a help menu and there's some information in there. And then Jenna, where also is the video there, and we also have it somewhere else? The carbon farm plan one.
Yes, so there's the help menu to the right on the project tracker. And currently we also have a tutorials tab under the about, but I think I should just move those tutorials into the help menu so it's all in one spot. But I didn't do that right away because Yes, thanks, Owen.
Okay, maybe you could put a link in there too for the tutorials. So anyhow, and we're updating it too. So please also email us like, hey, I would love it if you would make a little video or tutorial about this. Like I'm thinking now about maybe one around the like reporting on the budgeting, but anyhow. Okay. Sorry, Jenna's like doing a lot of multitasking. Can you go to the next slide? Okay, so we asked this question, or Nancy asked this question for us. How do we feel about reporting as a requirement to receive funding? So we kind of answered that. And then how the project tracker works financially right now is that we basically just ask people, we say like, hey, if you would like to put some money into the project tracker into your grants, that would be great, and let us know how much and send it to us. So we have probably like 5 RCDs that contribute annually right now. The project tracker is pretty inexpensive. It's like $12,000 a year for the whole system. And so we have been able to get grant funding, the Gold Ridge RCD, for the past, 5 years or more to cover most of those costs. So, but we're thinking in the future, both if we wanted to increase more of the functionality or continue to like fund a staff person like Jenna to support everybody, you know, what would your RCD be willing to contribute? And maybe you guys can't answer that specifically now, but we're kind of thinking like, okay, we pay like $30 a month for constant contact. Like, could we also pay $20 a month for the project tracker? And maybe we won't have to, depending on how we structure it, but that is something to consider moving forward. But again, currently right now, you don't have to pay anything to use it. Anyone have any feedback on that, the funding portion? Like if you had to contribute, it would be like a no-go, or it seems like that would be a reasonable thing to include in grants?
I think it depends, because there are a number of grantors that we have that would probably not fund that. But obviously it would be grant by grant, I guess.
Yeah, same. Okay, so let's just move on, make sure I get the other questions. We have just a couple minutes left. Actually, let's just say, do you guys have other general questions about things I didn't cover? Anyone?
I put some on the board, but they don't need to be answered now.
Yeah, I actually think Lisa's questions might be good to answer verbally, because I think there are things that probably pertain to a lot of people.
Sure.
So one of the questions she had was, do you have any recommendations regarding projects on private property? And we go into this a bit more in the carbon farm planning tutorial. So if you want to reference that later, it's written down there, but kind of our main recommendations are: 1, there's a feature that allows you to mark locations as private. And so what that means is only other people at your RCD who have permission to edit that project or administrators will be able to see the location. And then a convention that some people use, Marin RCD has done a lot of this, is if you have carbon farm plans and you don't want to identify the property, kind of giving it a somewhat generic name and then adding some details about what kind of operation. So like carbon farm plan 2, dairy, eggs. And then if you do that, it's easy to get confused yourself about which project tracker title corresponds with which project. So I'd recommend having like a local spreadsheet in your system that has keys between them.
We also do in our landowner agreements, we ask people permission to put their projects in the project tracker. So if people are like, yeah, I don't care, then we can, like the one we shared, it's a carbon farm plan and we share the parcel information. So anyone could know what property it was. Some people are more sensitive than others, but our experience so far mostly is that people have been not worried about having their projects in the project tracker, because it doesn't include a lot of. The thing that I guess to be careful about, and I'm sorry, we're going to run out of time, but is like for dairies, for instance, like types of ag operations that are often kind of harassed, I'll just say, by like activists, that like maybe they could say, like if you were doing a water quality improvement program and you were going to reduce nitrogen, then someone could then say like, oh, well, then that means they're polluting nitrogen if you're going to reduce it. So I think that would be an example where you might want to be sensitive about the specific location. Sarah?
I did have a question, and you guys might have covered this. Sorry, I've been in and out. Do you ever track like landowner contact information in there? Like, so it's also an internal tracker as well as, you know, an external open, you know, for funding opportunities and yeah.
So I would say if you're looking for like a contact management tool, it's probably not the best for that, but there is a section in the project tracker where it's private notes. So if you wanted to say like, you know, it's like, this is Sarah McKibben's farm and here's her gate code. And, you know, we also did these other projects, whether there is a spot where you can write that down, but it's not built to be a contact management database.
Yeah, it's just more for like, there's, you know, lots of moving parts and lots of, you know, people, there's overturn and the project manager might've moved on. And it's just like, it'd be great if it could double for a lot of that.
Yeah, you could even put in there like, you know, here's where to find the project information on our server or whatever.
Yeah. And then also for potential sites, I think you guys kind of touched on this anyway, for like needs funding. I guess it's sort of the same thing. Does anybody ever use it for like, oh, I met this great landowner and they're really interested in putting in hedgerows, or they want to do compost, you know, healthy soils applications or whatever. Just interested landowners in general that might be copacetic to future opportunities, whether or not, you know, I guess isn't that, it could be the same as just needs funding.
Yeah, I think you definitely could use it that way. I think, you know, it prompts you to give a lot of information. And so there might just not be information that you have for those things yet, depending on how nascent the conversation is with that, with that project.
Well, a lot of what we come across is like a funding opportunity comes in, it's like, great, now where we need hedgerow projects, or we need, you know, riparian projects. Like we sometimes have like this scramble to try to find the projects to match the funding. Yeah. And so it's like a two-way issue that we always end up having. So
we have that too. We don't currently use it for that, but I am thinking about it like we could. So yeah,
that's been something we've been most interested in, so that we can like filter like, okay, we have funding for this type of projects. Let's filter, you know, go to the project tracker and filter out all those. Okay.
We'll try it out. I mean, if you have a couple hours you can spend on it, you know, if it's your first time, you know, meet with Jenna so they can get your RCD activated in the tracker and that kind of stuff. But yeah, enter in a few and see how that feels and works, and maybe give us feedback for what doesn't work and does for that scenario. We internally keep kind of spreadsheets, at least I'm pretty sure Noelle does, but I don't.
Yeah.
I think that would be actually a lot easier, because then I wouldn't have to ask Noelle where her spreadsheet is. So
right. Or they just end up collecting digital dust and like, hey, let's create this spreadsheet. Like, oh yeah, we did that 3 years ago. We already have 4 of those. Yeah. So yeah.
Could I fit one more quick question?
Yeah, I want to honor time. So anyone who needs to go, feel free. But I actually have a meeting canceled, so I can stay here as long as anyone wants.
So then I'll take advantage of you not having that other meeting. So I'm just kind of getting excited about looking at the metrics that we're asked to provide for like annual reports and quarterly reports, and I'm just thinking about WCB right now, and lining up, finding out what's missing, you know, what isn't in Project Tracker, and seeing if we could get those fields added, but maybe not visible. Is it possible to keep some things out of the pretty reports? And because then everybody would just have to do it all right there, and that would be
you know, it's not really created to do grant reporting exactly, like at least what I'm thinking, like the details at which you need things, it has a lot of that in there, but you know, I don't know, let's talk about it.
Yeah, I think we should look. It might not make sense. I can't, because I can't envision it yet, but wouldn't that be cool? I mean, then we would kill 2 birds with 1 stone. It would be really nice.
Yeah, and all the data you can download into spreadsheets. So if you had it all there and it was easy for you, so everyone did the tracker, you knew there was a deadline, then you can go and pull out that data and then put it in whatever format your funder wanted. That, I think that's definitely possible. But as far as it being like in the format your funder might want to report, I don't know if it could do that.
Yeah. I don't think that, I mean, some of them don't care about the format. They just want the info, right? So, I mean, some of these beautiful reports would be a lovely thing for a funder to have when they want to show off what they've done, as you know, as you already know, but it might not even be that much of a problem. But like you're saying, if you can pull it into a spreadsheet, then you could use it that way too. So
yeah, so you could definitely, we
Okay.
can definitely add more fields and make them private. That I know we can do. And the other thing that we are playing with that we haven't quite figured out is we have a way of tagging projects. So in speaking about like projects versus programs, so say CRCD had this big grant from WCB and they wanted all the RCDs to report. So it would probably make most sense where each individual's RCD was mapping what they were doing on specific properties separately. But then if they could tag it all under this, like whatever CRC WC project, then that would be a way to collect all that data. So right now, tagging can only be done by the administrators for some reason. So that's the hitch, is that I can do it, Jenna can do it, Devin can do it. But that there's no way for the like project managers to do it. So we're trying to figure that out right now, but we could set it up ahead of time, or when we see projects coming through, if you send us a help note, we can do it. And that's not ideal, but in the interim, we could do something like that.
The tags also aren't publicly visible right now. We're the
But it
only
would-
ones who can
Oh.
see and edit them.
Well, anyways, we'll be thinking
But
about
if we have enough interest, I think that's a feature we can ask Sitka, the tech company that makes it, to broaden. You know, I think it's kind of a pilot feature right now for them.
There's actually like this other thing, which maybe I'll do a presentation on another time, but they've, one of the new features that's been added because it's a, open source technology is they've created, you're gonna have to tell me what it's called, Jen, I always forget. It's like basically like match.com, but for funders. And so you can put all your projects in there that need to be funded, and then funders can go and search for different things. And it's like just another, it's another view. And so this is like the Idaho version of this project uses it. And so that's one of the things we've been considering turning on. If we had enough projects in there where people were asking for funding, then that would be actually a great spot for funders to go and like look for a bunch of projects that need funding and sort through them and find ones they wanted to fund. Okay. Anything else, you guys? Okay, well, Jenna is here until July, so don't procrastinate on utilizing Jenna.
When are we having our meeting, Brittany, the CRCD meeting to talk
With
about?
Karen. So I'm meeting with Karen on, I think, the 16th of March. Maybe you can ask Hannah to include you on the invite. I don't know
Yeah.
who she included. And then I think that's the right date. I have to
Great.
double check.
Okay.
And then I'm
Thanks.
hoping, if needed, that I could present to the board. So one of the things we want to talk about with you all is that we think it would be help incentivize the program and help the RCDs and CRCD. I think if CRCD was the administrator instead of me, because I have really no sway in encouraging people to do things who are not my staff. And I think that we need kind of like our statewide entity to encouraging us and utilizing the data to support the lobbying that you guys are doing and the justifying. So that is my goal, is to move it so that it's a project of CARCD, that it's supported by its RCDs, but not a project of Gold Ridge RCD.
Yeah.
So
Makes total sense. Cool.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'll ask Hannah to, I think she alluded to that in an email, and now I
Okay.
understand what she was talking about. So.
I'll look for it and forward it to you. Okay, well, thanks all for your time. And hopefully, I don't know if we stopped recording a while ago, but
It's still recording.
well, anyways. Good to,
Trim.
good to see you.